Damon Albarn's musical career spans generations. Gen Z knows him as the lead vocalist of Gorillaz, the world's most successful virtual band according to the Guinness Book of World Records. However, millennials would remember him as the frontman of Blur, one of the most influential bands during the age of Britpop. Albarn was born on 23rd March 1968. He grew up in Leytonstone, East London. From a young age, he was interested in learning about other people and their cultures. His bohemian family also influenced his music tastes, as his parents frequently listened to blues, Indian and African music. Damon Albarn met Graham Coxon at Stanway Comprehensive School. Upon first meeting, Graham thought that Damon was a show-off, and Damon thought Graham's shoes were unfashionable. They started writing songs together and performing them at morning school assemblies under the band name Real Lives. Damon recalled these early performances as a baptism of fire. His musical talent encompassed the piano, guitar, and violin, and one of his songs won a heat in the Young Composer of the Year competition. Attending Goldsmiths College in 1988, Damon and Graham formed a band called Circus, along with drummer Dave Rowntree. Their ensemble lacked a bassist, and so Alex James joined the group. They underwent another name change and became Seymour, but their record label thought the name was uninspiring, and essentially handed Damon Albarn and his bandmates a list of names to choose from. Damon, Graham, Alex, and Dave settled for the name Blur. Leisure was the band's first album, released in 1991. Damon Albarn would later reflect that the album was awful, though it still peaked at number 7 on UK charts. The following year, the band discovered themselves to be £60,000 in debt. Their resolution was to tour the US, and the tour makes history books as one of the greatest failures in rock history. The US had an obsession with rebellious, nihilistic grunge, and were less than enthralled in an English rock band and their upbeat choruses. The roller coaster tour had small turnouts at overplayed venues, leaving the members of Blur bored, drunk, and homesick. To keep themselves entertained, they played the punching game, where they would take turns punching each other. Blur shared the tour with 3 other independent rock bands. Performances turned into a drunken competition for who could be the loudest, and sometimes the sound pressure from My Bloody Valentine's song You Made Me Realize caused pint glasses to fall from people's hands. Graham Coxon also tells a story of being chased out of one radio station by people with shotguns because they cussed on air. After 44 nights of homesickness in the US, Damon Albarn and the other band members wanted to write songs with a distinct British character. Blur's 1993 album, Modern Life is Rubbish, only sold 19,000 copies. Their record label predicted this reception, dismissing the album as commercial suicide before it was even released. The Specials, Funboy 3, and John Lennon were some of Damon's earliest influences in songwriting. In particular, when he started playing Lennon's Imagine on piano, he fell in love with the song. Damon described Graham as being more clued up than him, since he was a fan of The Who, but they both enjoyed bands such as The Human League, The Beatles, and The Jam. These were some of their early inspirations. Blur had established themselves as pop stars in 1990, with their first track, She's So High, which made number 48 on UK charts. When Blur found themselves struggling with their second single, they acquired the assistance of producer Stephen Street, who helped them make progress until they completed There's No Other Way. Street returned to produce Modern Life is Rubbish, and then stuck around to produce their third album, Parklife. Blur was in dire trouble financially. Their careers as musicians depended entirely on the success of Parklife. Saying the album was successful would be an understatement. Damon's prolific songwriting made Parklife a staple of British culture in the 90s. Selling nothing short of 5 million copies worldwide, Blur experienced a meteoric rise to fame. In the words of Graham Coxon, Blur went from being regarded as an alternative left-field arty band to this amazing new pop sensation. Unfortunately, the sudden rise to notoriety caused Damon to suffer panic attacks. The genre of Britpop had started going mainstream, and some other bands on the scene were Elastica, Suede, Supergrass, and The Verve, but the most prominent were Blur and their arch-rivals, Oasis. Oasis formed in 1991 and were a band of working-class northerners, and they went head-to-head with Blur in one of the greatest rock and roll chart rivalries of all time, the Battle of Britpop. The two bands threw playful digs at each other through the media. But there was something more going on. Blur represented the university-educated hipster southerners, whilst Oasis were working-class heroes from the north. The seemingly petty and immature chart battle split England in two. It all came down to one specific day, 14th of August 1955, when both bands would be releasing their latest singles. It became apparent later that Damon Albarn moved the release date of Country House to directly challenge Oasis's single, Roll With It. When 14th of August came, the songs were released, and Blur was victorious in the Battle of Britpop, outselling Oasis by 58,000 copies. When playing on the television show Top of the Pops, Alex James made sure to wear an Oasis t-shirt. Though it is often said that Blur won the battle but Oasis won the war. Blur released their fourth studio album, The Great Escape, to high critical praise. Melody Maker even gave the album a 12 out of 10, but the acclaim was withdrawn, and even apologised for, when Oasis released What's the Story? Morning Glory 1 month later. The album went on to achieve global success, selling 22 million copies worldwide and becoming the UK's 5th best-selling album of all time. In the end, the magazines just wanted to support the most commercially successful album for profit purposes, so it's still debatable which album was critically better. At the 96 Brit Awards, Oasis was certain to give a friendly shout out to their old friends from Blur.
I'd like to thank all the people. People, so many people, and they walk your counting hands through their shite life.
Oasis wasn't the only band to rival Blur. Brett Anderson, lead vocalist of Suede, held a very personal grudge against Damon Albarn, because Damon stole his girlfriend. Justine Frischmann had been in a long relationship with Brett. They broke up and Justine started dating Damon while still living with Brett. As you can imagine, Brett wasn't all that happy with Damon and wrote a whole song about him called Animal Lover, which appeared on Suede's debut album. The public changed their attitude towards Damon after the Battle of Britpop. Since he came from a more wealthy middle-class family and received higher education, he was perceived as inauthentic compared to the Oasis members, who were everyday construction workers before rising to fame. To escape the competition with Oasis, Blur's style had to evolve. Some thought Blur were committing commercial suicide when they decided to switch to a more lo-fi, underground style, since they would alienate their teenage girl fanbase. Singles from their self-titled fifth album were much more Americanized, which helped them become more internationally successful. Blur's album 13 drifted even further from Britpop. Many of Damon's lyrics were inspired by his breakup with Justine, and tracks such as Tender and No Distance Left to Run reflected on the struggle of moving on. Their relationship had a spectacularly sad end, after a holiday that attempted to rekindle their romance. Towards the end, their relationship was strained due to Damon's hope of having children and Justine's friendship with ex-boyfriend Brett Anderson. After being with Justine for 8 years, the separation took an emotional toll on Damon and his music style. Of the record, he quotes, "It's a tribute to how important she was in my life. It's a celebration of love found and lost but not forgotten." He said that their new producer, William Orbit, was a bit of a psychiatrist through all of this. William Orbit had replaced Stephen Street as Blur's producer for 13. Yes, it was difficult, said Damon, about the decision to dismiss Stephen Street. He'll be forever part of what we are, and ironically, he gave us the tools we needed to go at it alone. It was such a personal thing going on. We needed to have someone who didn't really know us. 13 was a problematic album to record. In the film No Distance Left to Run, drummer Dave Rowntree said, "It was quite a sad process making it. People were not turning up to the sessions or turning up drunk, being abusive and storming off." Throughout these years, Graham Coxon had become disillusioned with the music industry. Not only that, but he was suffering from serious depression. At a party celebrating Blur's chart success over Oasis, Graham attempted to throw himself out of a window. He later said of the incident, "It felt like a hollow, pointless victory to me. I felt like I was being forced to enjoy the moment, and I just wanted to be alone really. I couldn't handle being part of that crowd, so I tried to jump out of a 6-story window. It was Damon who talked me out of it." Graham's mental health deteriorated, and he refused to be in the music video for Country House unless he could dress as a milkman. In the video for the Universal, Graham is slumped in the corner and not much attention is drawn to him. He was eventually hospitalized due to alcoholism and remained there for a month. Afterwards, Graham spent a week in the recording studio with Blur. The band's manager told Graham that the recording sessions weren't going too well with him present, and Graham took that as a sign to leave Blur behind. The album Think Tank relied on other instruments to replace Graham's lead guitar. Damon later revealed that Sweet Song, the 10th song on the album, was written about Graham. After Think Tank in 2003, Blur would not produce another studio album for 12 years, but in their years together from the early 90s to the early 2000s, they achieved enormous success. In addition to selling millions of records, they have won 11 NME Awards, 5 Brit Awards, 2 Smash Hit Awards, and also got the first music on Mars. Beagle 2 needed to send a signal back to Earth to indicate when it made it to Mars. Damon and the other members of Blur had the privilege of composing the song, which would serve as this signal. However, no communication was received from the spacecraft at the time it was meant to land on Mars, and its remains were located in 2015, lying on the surface of the Red Planet. Damon and Graham would eventually reconcile in 2008, and the band came together for a show in Hyde Park, mid-2009. Blur reunited again to release another album together in 2015. But did Oasis really win the war? In 2001, Damon Albarn and Jamie Hewlett released the first album of their virtual band Gorillaz. Damon was the lead vocalist and Jamie was one of the artists. The album sold more than 7 million copies worldwide. On the other hand, Oasis's 2000 album, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, made only 3 million sales. Damon had beaten Oasis by 4 million albums sold. Gorillaz has collaborated with many artists, such as Sir Elton John, and Tina Weymouth from Talking Heads did the backing vocals on Gorillaz' single 192000. It's easy to get caught up in the battle of Britpop and forget that you can appreciate Blur and Oasis equally for their different contributions to music. When the magazines changed their support from Blur to Oasis, they gave a perfect demonstration of how commercially skewed critical opinions can be. In the end, the best music is the music you, personally, enjoy. I became a fan of Blur listening to Parklife and The Great Escape on repeat while studying last year. Feel free to leave a comment about how you became a fan, and I forgot to include that funny clip of Liam Gallagher.
Just when it seemed the gloves were off, Liam has made public his crush on Damon's girlfriend, Justine Frischmann of Elastica.
What about Justine of Elastica? Do you really fancy her then?
Yeah.
Are you going to go for her?
No. She's going to go for me.